Hot stove conversations about baseball, history, football, and current events that may leave you saying there's more to consider. Now, here's your host, Jack Moore.
Welcome to More to Consider with Jack and Charles. How are you, brother?
I'm doing all right, man. Doing all right.
All right, you got something on your mind.
Yeah.
Talk to me.
Big Pharma. I know this is like a third rail sometimes when it comes to advertising, but still,
Yeah. Imagine
big,
that.
Big Pharma, that percentage of how much pharmaceutical ads actually fund the alphabet networks is really terrifying. It really is. And if you're contributing that much money to Fox or ABC or NBC or CBS, whoever it is, you have to think that that money speaks volumes when it comes to the decisions of the stories that these quote unquote news organizations are actually going to cover. And I got into a debate with a person several weeks ago when it came to the school shootings.
Right.
The guy's like, we need to get rid of the guns. And, it's the guns the problem. And I said to him, well, I've never heard of a gun just hopping off of a table and just shooting somebody. I've never heard of that happening. In world history, as far as I know, this never happened. But it is the people that cause these issues. I said to him, I said, isn't it interesting, though, you never hear, you hear about the person's background, kind of school they went to, what kind of family they grew up in, blah, 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 blah. But you never hear what kind of drugs were they on.
Right.
Because that is a very valid question.
Right.
If you have drugs like, please correct me on this if I'm wrong, Prozac, well, one of the side effects of Prozac is suicide. That's
an
the whole purpose,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what is the whole point?
Yeah, on the commercial, like, don't take this if you're suicidal, right? If you're depressed, don't take this stuff for depression, right? Okay.
In some people, it actually causes even more severe. Now, I understand where all humans are different.
Issue. Yeah, it's like a 180 type of drug. I think some of those it could go either way with how it plays out for you, right?
But when you look at these school shooters, ever since probably Columbine, if not before then, they're all on SSRIs.
Yeah.
Not all, but 90+% of them are on SSRIs. Serotonin, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors is what SSRI stands for. And these drugs are really dangerous. And come to find out that if a mother is taking these drugs, it passes on to the kid. It's another thing they don't want you to know, ubiquitous they. But these are questions that really need to be asked and they need to be answered. But the problem, if we're relying on our news organizations, the big news organizations to ask these questions, you first have to take the money away from them that they're getting from Big Pharma. You have to do that. And I would love to see us join the rest of the world, except for New Zealand, and ban pharmaceutical advertisements on TV. It's like they banned tobacco advertisements, so on and so forth. Once they realized that these things were detrimental to society, pharmaceutical companies really have a stranglehold when it comes to the information that's actually getting out about their own products. It's a huge problem, and it's scary. It's scary to know that I was.
All right, let me ask you something then. Mm-hmm. Okay, this comes to me then. All right, so we had Charles and I had a talk recently. I'm like, I've heard Joe Rogan say, "Don't ever read your comments." No, we don't get the volume of comments, but we were doing one the other day, and I was talking about sort of rural gun culture, and I was talking about some kid. They all hunt in the family, 50-some weapons, and we were talking. I wouldn't say gleefully, but I'm just kind of saying that these people that grow up in these environments with 27 hunting dogs and 55 weapons, they're great hunters. They're good with firearms. They're very responsible people, and they just grew up in gun culture. And I look in the comments and somebody's like, the things you're talking about, what leads to our dead children in the schools.
Oh, gosh.
Okay. No, wow. and I don't want, I don't want to belittle what that person's saying. However, and I've said this many times before, I think it was Virginia Tech. And what was that, 05 or 06? I was practicing law at the time, and I went by to see our friend at the radio station, and we got to talking. We were on the air, and a guy called in. I mean, this is what he said. This is what he said. He said, "Gosh, Tony, like in 1964, I was on the shooting team in high school in Mississippi, where I graduated in 1964, and I carried my rifle on the bus every day with live ammunition in a separate box. The rifle wasn't loaded, and no one thought anything of it. And I was telling that story to some guys from about 25, 30 miles from where I am now, in a pretty rural area farming community. And he laughed and said, man, up until about 20 years ago, every day you came out here to the parking lot, there were nothing but rifles and shotguns and all in the back of every kid. They had the shotgun rack, because they were going to go hunting. As soon as school ended, they were going to go hunting, and they were X number of miles towards the hunting site, so they weren't going to go back and get their weapons. And all of them had the mindset, and I've been in that environment. I've been in environments around people who had multiple firearms, and you never would have thought of them. So what has changed? And really the country changed a lot with Charles Whitman, even though I brought up that the Bath, Michigan school disaster was in 1927 or 28 or whatever. But now Whitman believed himself to be, something was wrong with his mind. And he had a brain tumor, all the experts said. 1966, he goes to a tower in Austin, Texas, and starts shooting at people. That was completely unheard of. And then the 84 McDonald's was a big deal. The 84 McDonald's in San Diego. And I'm just talking about shootings in a sense to say we started to see the pattern of a lot of mental illness. We do have issues as to policy, whether people are on the street. Oh, but what I was going to ask you, I'm going into that whole thing. Wouldn't it help the pharmaceuticals if they're the ones cranking out the drugs? And if in fact we do see what at least appears to be on the surface, a correlation that seems to be pretty strong between a lot of kids on drugs and a lot of school shootings, wouldn't we want to blame it on the guns? Wouldn't we want our mouthpiece on our alphabet news agencies saying, well, clearly it's got to be the guns. It's the guns. And like you said, the guns don't jump up and do anything, but people that are already somewhat broken and on medications, medications that are pretty scary. And I'm not saying that the pharmaceuticals would be in league with this, but wouldn't it be in their best interest to get the heat? Because how many times do you see an open discussion on some of these networks about, could it potentially be an issue with young people and drugs? How many times do you hear that?
But we don't.
Yeah, I don't really hear that. It generally goes to the type of firearm.
Yeah, it's always the type of firearm. Like it's the gun again. It's an inanimate object. Like it's developing a soul and a consciousness, on itself, and they're going out doing these horrible things without some sort of input from a human. That's pretty much what they want us to think. It's just like, that's interesting. I never thought about it this way. It would be the same argument as, oh yeah, the driverless cars. Yeah, it's the driverless cars that's causing the accidents. In that case, you know what? I would agree with you. Yeah, I would agree. But I don't recall any, should I say, personless guns.
Right.
The two have to they have to go together for the gun to actually function. A car is a different story, but you can place the blame on a gun. You can. Yeah.
What's the reform you're calling for? Are you saying that you feel like people that make drugs of whatever type shouldn't be in the business of financially supporting shows, of news shows?
I think that what should happen, the news organizations are clearly being, let's just say, they're being controlled by ad dollars. Do I have an issue with that? Not exactly, but what we should do is realize that because of this, we probably should take what these news organizations are saying with a grain of salt.
I think we're there.
Honestly.
I think we're
Yeah, I think it needs to be more. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, it needs to be more. Yeah.
I do kind of remember too, there was quite a bit of like Lockheed Martin too, right? Weren't they?
Well, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then
I say the same thing about this all the time. Please tell me why
the joke
Boeing and
was, yeah.
Lockheed Martin
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
not really a
Yeah, well,
joke
no, the
because
joke
it
is
happened.
no. The joke is you're watching the 5 o'clock news. They're not trying to sell you a $27 million jet, right? Like, well, you're not going to buy that. So,
No,
like,
no, but
why are they advertising during the 6 o'clock news? There is an argument for that. Like, okay, go ahead.
they mostly advertise on like the Sunday news shows, the Sunday
Right, that's true. That's
panel
true.
shows,
But once again,
and
you're not
you
going to
would have
buy
to
one of
ask the
these
question
jets.
why.
Yeah,
Right,
it's
yeah, there's
it's
very
their
few
way,
people on the planet that can afford to buy one of
right?
those jets.
So there could be a very
But
reasonable
when you have
argument
these,
to there's a reasonable argument to be made that they're pumping money into a show because the people on that show will say what they need to say to get that item somewhere in the world so they can make money and support their use of these
I,
type of weapons.
I, I, I guess you're right. I mean, I think it's a little different for the fact that when it comes to pharmaceuticals, um, when you have ads that say contact your doctor about, the
Yeah.
Lexafil
Yep.
or whatever the drug is, and then come to find out, and I know this personally, that pharmaceutical companies will go to doctors and pay them to give a talk, quote unquote talk, at some really nice five-star restaurant to just a small group of people, other doctors usually, or their own staff, to push these pharmaceuticals on their patients. They give them a cut for it. They literally get a cut for every prescription that they write
Yeah.
for this drug. That's a problem, man. That's a huge problem because you're literally giving doctors the incentive to say, you know what, I don't think you. Perfect example, Ozempic. I think it's a really, really good example. Ozempic is this quote unquote miracle weight loss drug. Now, a doctor could go and say, hey, take this Ozempic, and they get a cut, or they could say, why don't you just watch what you eat and get some exercise? They don't get any money for that. So what are they going to do? They're going to push the drug. That's what they're going to do.
But isn't the argument too? We certainly know this. We know this just in our life experience. There's a lot of people who have been X number of pounds overweight forever, and they try a fad diet, they lose 30 pounds, they gain back 40. You know that whole thing. We've we've all lived it and seen it. So isn't the argument, at least for that medication, that it gets the job done? It gets weight
Well,
off.
just like
I know at a great expense generally, or it could be at a great expense, but go ahead.
it generally is. There's no such thing. I can't remember who said. There's no such thing as a biological free lunch. It
Hmm.
just doesn't exist.
Right.
So just like you said about the fad diet,
Hmm.
well, Ozempic, you can say it's a fad pharmaceutical
Right.
because specifically when it comes to weight loss and health and stuff like that, it's a lifestyle. It's not something that's temporary. You have to maintain that yourself. You can't just go out and lose 50 pounds or 60 pounds or whatever, and then just say, "Oh, I reached my goal. Now I'm going to go back to what I was doing before." No, you can't do that. But
But
most people won't.
I don't know where it is
So,
anymore, but like the gastric bypass, I've had friends, I've known people that had drastic changes in their life, lost massive amount of weight with that. I don't know if that's out of
yeah,
favor, but I mean, there are some times that I have seen people that it seemed like they were at the I got to do something drastic. So, this
yeah.
I know this thing was really hyped up as a super medication. All right, so but where we kind of started from, you feel like it sounds like from what you're saying, there may be not so much an unfair, but maybe an unsettling influence that a many corporations that make up this, what we want to call big pharma, they have maybe an undue influence on our culture through the way we get news, the way certain things
Yes.
are influenced in the culture, and it gets a little difficult though about the regulation aspect of it. But it is interesting, as we say, that the companies that make drugs and make things that go boom and fly around the world and drop bombs, that's who, like you say, it's pretty much the funding of the major news networks and their Sunday afternoon policy talks.
Yes. It's essentially take drugs, start wars,
Blow things
and
up.
and stuff like that. That's the vast majority of what is considered as news today, unfortunately. Anyway,
All right.
that's
So
all.
what's your final answer to that?
I think we as Americans, we should not take what everybody says as gospel and do some research yourself. Find out if what is being said to you is actually the truth by going out and getting, evidence on both sides and coming to your own conclusion versus um, just taking what they say as I said, gospel. Man, it really isn't healthy. And the next thing we can end up like the end of that movie, Wall-E, where we're just on these giant floaty bed things and we're, you know, 300 pounds and we're having people just feed us all kinds of garbage and stuff like that and not really realizing that we've done this to ourselves.
I'll
Yeah.
try to stay away from that. Okay, we're gonna from
Yes.
that outcome. Yeah. All right, Charles, love you, brother.
All right.
Thanks for
How you
coming
doing?
on again. And
Yes.
that's the show for this segment. And we'll be back to see you soon. Please like,
Okay.
subscribe, leave comments. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, subscribe and hit your notification button to get an update when we post another episode. See you soon.